Hi, my name is John Alzheimer, and I'm a credit expert who contributes to creditcardinsider.com. Today's question is this: should I use a credit card or should I use a debit card? Excellent question. So quick differentiation between the two because they're not the same things, although they look identical. A credit card is essentially an extension of credit by a bank or a credit card issuer that you can use at your leisure at any retailer or merchant that accepts that type of card. And you have a credit limit associated with it. So in other words, it is the upper boundaries of the amount that can be spent on that card. Depending on the card, the credit limit can be as low as $500, it can be as high as $35,000, or higher, depending on how much money you make. It is unsecured, which means that there is no asset that secures your use of the card like a home or a car secures those types of loans. A debit card is actually very different than a credit card because it is not an extension of credit. It's essentially a plastic version of a check, of the old-fashioned paper check. And whenever you swipe your debit card, the money comes from a deposit in your savings or checking account. So the question is, well, which should I use? There are pros and cons to each. And frankly, I think there are more pros to credit cards than there are to debit cards. You have considerably more access to credit, obviously, or access to capacity using a credit card. Most people don't keep $10,000 in their checking account just so they can use a debit card. Actually, that would be very foolish to do so because you earn almost no interest doing so. So a credit card gives you more usability options. Second is the fraud protections associated with a credit card are considerably better than the fraud protections associated with the debit card. With a credit card, you're protected by the Fair Credit Billing Act. The Fair Credit Billing Act caps your liability on credit card fraud to no more than $50. And all four of the major credit card networks, Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and Discover, have zero liability policies, so even if your card is stolen and used, it's very unlikely that you're ever going to have to pay a penny out of your pocket. Another thing to consider when your credit card, if your credit card is ever stolen, is that that's not your money. That's the bank's money. So the sense of urgency is going to be on their shoulders to get the fraud solved and stopped rather than on your shoulders. You can't say the same thing for a debit card. If your debit card is stolen, your cap on liability is $500, and that's only if you notify your bank very soon after the fraud has occurred or the breach has occurred. In many cases, you're not going to pay anything for fraud on a debit card, but your liability is capped at a much higher number than it is with a credit card. The second thing to consider about debit cards is that that is your money. So in other words, if someone steals your debit card and takes $1,000 out of it, that's $1,000 out of your checking account. And now the sense of urgency is on your shoulders to get it back, not necessarily on the bank's shoulders. And while that $1,000 is missing from your checking account, other transactions that you think are clearing may not actually be clearing because that money is not there to help pay them. So if you have your rent auto-debited or your gym membership auto-debited or your utilities or your cell phone bills auto-debited or your Netflix subscriptions auto-debited against your checking account, those transactions may not actually clear because the money is not there because it has been stolen. And while you're likely going to get it back, it could take a couple of weeks to get it back, and while that's gone, it's gone. That means you could be incurring over-limit fees, bounce check fees, and the merchant could be charging you late fees. And if you're late enough, they could be sticking late payments on a credit report if it's a liability that does end up showing up on a credit report. So the downside risk to fraud for a debit card is considerably higher than the downside risk of fraud on a credit card. You also don't have the same kind of capacity because, again, most people will only keep a few $100s in their checking account, not thousands and thousands of dollars. So they're very hard to use for things like business travel and leisure travel because there's just not a whole lot of money in them. Another thing to consider about debit cards is that when you do travel, and especially at hotels and rental cars and gas stations, that they will put a hold against the funds within the account that are going to exceed the amount that you've charged that day. So most gas stations, when you swipe your card outside, you think that they're just charging or holding the amount of the gas you dumped in your tank. Not so. They actually hold much higher, usually twice as much as you've paid, until the transaction clears a couple of days later. So while those funds are being held, again, they're not there to help clear other transactions. So the debit card, in my mind, is only good because it has budgetary controls built in, because you can only spend what's in your checking account. In my mind, that is not good enough to move it ahead of the credit card as far as what you should have in your wallet and what you should use. Credit card, massive usability, zero fraud liability. Debit card, not very good usability, not as good fraud liability. Better budgetary protections. So weigh those before you decide which you're going to use. If you have any questions pertaining to credit or financial topics, please submit them to creditcardinsider.com. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.